Hello again. Until a few years ago, the word decolonise meant, and I quote from my trusty Oxford English Dictionary, revised 2005, decolonise, to withdraw from a colony, leaving it independent. There now, see how language has changed in less than 20 years. When we hear people talking about decolonisation now, that's not at all what they mean, withdrawing from countries. They are talking about, although nobody says it out loud, the destruction of British culture and its replacement by a strange and distorted version of African American culture. So the opposite really of decolonisation, whatever meaning you give to the word. This is really the colonisation of Britain by means of ideology, language and culture. It goes hand in hand with, and is an integral part of, the actual physical colonisation of the country by people from Africa and Asia. Most of us today, when we hear about decolonisation, imagine that it means perhaps removing racist material from British history and trying to recognise the contributions of other cultures, especially those in what was once the British Empire. This at least is what we are intended to believe. It is a lie. The aim is really to replace our traditional literature and ways of thinking with writing and ideology from the black culture of the United States. Let's look at one or two recent examples to see how this process is working in Britain today. The English literature course at Stirling University has decided to abandon Jane Austen as an author to study as part of an effort to decolonise the curriculum. This is motivated in part by the fact that Austen's father, the Reverend George Austen, was at one time a trustee of a sugar plantation in Antigua. A case of the sins of the father being visited upon the children out there, I fancy. Her books are also too full of Regency-era colonialism. She is to be replaced in the curriculum by the black American writer Toni Morrison, because this will enable students to study racial differences and critical race theory, according to Stirling University. Now, why do you suppose that teenagers studying English literature would need to be taught critical race theory? This is not about decolonising anything, but rather indoctrinating young people with a particular and controversial modern ideology, which was developed in the premier first world country of America 30 years ago. Replacing an author whose books have been recognised as great literature for over 200 years is a lousy idea anyway. At the time that Jane Austen was writing, there were many other authors whose names were at the time far more well known than hers. People like Maria Edgeworth, Samuel Richardson, Madame de Stael, William Godwin and many others. Most people won't have heard of these writers, although all will be familiar with the name Jane Austen. This is because history has winnowed out the others and left us with the very best of the period, people like Jane Austen and Walter Scott. Since Toni Morrison only died less than 3 years ago, this process has not yet even begun. She's popular now for what she says about being black, but we do not have the perspective to judge her from a literary viewpoint. In a few decades, she might be quite forgotten. This is why we tend to stick to authors who have been recognised as great writers for a long time. That's why those people are taught on literature courses. Toni Morrison was chosen for an English literature course not because she wrote good literature, but purely because she was a black American woman writing about the black American experience of being black. Let's turn to another example of how decolonisation is working its poison through the British educational system. The Cambridge Latin course books have been immensely useful over the last 50 years in teaching Latin to school children. I used them with my own daughter. Cambridge University Press, who published them, have come in for criticism because the books feature Roman families and Roman society as a way of teaching vocabulary. These have such expressions as that such and such a person who was a slave was happy. Happy slaves? Who ever heard of such a thing? This is disgusting. Why, it's almost a celebration of slavery, and it reminds some people of the depiction of slaves in Gone with the Wind as being happy and content with their lot. It seems that, and I quote, that the books contain the objectification of women, the casual stereotyping of non-Romans, and the blind acceptance of the financial transaction in which one human being is sold to another. Those Romans, honestly. Never mind that the Cambridge Latin course is meant to show everyday life in ancient Rome as a way of teaching the language. Those ancient Romans must be taught to speak and think like us. The sensitivity to the question of slavery is again something imported from the United States, and it's a matter of great sensitivity to black people in that country for obvious reasons. In case anybody doesn't get this, let me explain that most black people in America are descended from slaves who were taken to the country against their will. They are bound to be touchy, therefore, about slavery. Every black person in Britain, by contrast, has chosen to come and live in this country. This makes for quite a different state of affairs. What is happening is that American ideas such as critical race theory are being imported into this country and have now been grafted onto university courses on English literature. This is not decolonisation at all. It is this country being colonised by an alien ideology founded upon conditions in a country which is very different from our own. It's time to fight back against this attack on British culture. As usual, in the description to this video, I give links to news items about the matters that I've been discussing today.